What makes someone a good person? As an abstract question, it isn't very difficult to come up with answers. If we all took a minute to write down the attributes of a good person, we would probably have fairly similar lists. A good person treats others with respect, is generous, isn't greedy, isn't selfish. It's not too difficult to come up with the attributes. But what if you change the question just ever so slightly? What if instead of the abstract, we make it personal, intensely personal? Am I a good person? Suddenly the question becomes much more difficult to answer. Hopefully difficult to answer. And difficult because in the real world, these values, they are not absolutes, but they exist on a spectrum. No matter how nice of a person you are and try to be, you could always be a little bit nicer. No matter how generous you are, you could always be a little more generous. How do you know if where you fall on the spectrum is enough to be good enough? In the Jewish tradition, we look to our Hebrew Bible for guidance. The characters we find within it illustrate the values that our religion elevates, or in some cases denigrates. By studying it, we can tap into the faith of Abraham, the spirituality of Hannah, the optimism of Caleb, the generosity of Rebekah. But more than any other character, when we look for guidance and inspiration, we turn to the person these 5 books are named after, none other than Moses. And in this parashah, we find one approach to answering how we might answer our own question. To set the stage, Moses has recently learned that he is not going to be entering the promised land. The goal that he had risked his life for and devoted his life to, every day from sunrise to long after sunset, day after day, week after week, year after year, and decade after decade, that goal had been taken from him. The endless sea of sand that he had been trudging through would be the same sand he would be buried in. All because of a mistake that God wouldn't even reveal and that our tradition has not confidently identified. And here this week, God reminds Moses of his fate once again. And how? How does this leader, Moses, respond? Moses says to God, "Let Adonai, source of the breaths of all flesh, appoint someone over the community who shall go out before them and come in before them, and who shall take them out and bring them in, so that Adonai's community may not be like sheep that have no shepherd." In this moment, Moses wasn't even thinking about himself. One of our commentaries explains that Moses' response is a model for righteous behavior. When the righteous leave this world, they set their own needs aside and deal with the needs of the public. Of course, there is another way to interpret the story. We must place it in the context of the Torah portion. Immediately before Moses asks God about the new leader, we read the story of Machlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah, the daughters of Zelophehad. Their father had died, and they, as women, they were not entitled to his inheritance. They had the courage and the confidence to go to Moses and to the elders and say that this wasn't fair and this wasn't right. And Moses, in turn, takes the matter to God, who agrees with them. The law is changed. The daughters now receive their late father's inheritance. And immediately after this episode, Moses asks God, "Who will lead this people after me?" According to one commentator, what Moses is really asking or hoping is that the answer that God will give is that, Moses, it's going to be your children. Moses is rationalizing, if I can't be the one, please God, give me the honor of choosing my children. Our first interpretation gives us a Moses so selfless that he doesn't think for a moment about his own personal tragedy and is only concerned with the welfare of the people who are in his care. The second interpretation presents a leader more concerned with what is best for his family and his own legacy than for the people he leads. The second reading, understandable as it might be, is not exactly the image of a holy role model. But since we cannot know quite what was inside Moses' mind, let us examine his actions. God instructs Moses, "Single out Joshua, son of Nun, an inspired man, and lay your hand upon him. Have him stand before Eleazar the priest and before the whole community, and commission him in their sight. Invest him with some of your authority so that the whole Israelite community may obey." And how does Moses respond here? He does exactly what God commands, with one exception. God instructs, "V'samachta et yadecha elav," lay your hand upon him. But when the Torah recounts what Moses actually did, instead of laying a hand, a yad, Moses lays yadayim, two hands. God asks Moses to legitimize Joshua so the people will accept him as their ruler. And Moses goes above and beyond to show the people this person has his full faith and support. But that leaves us wondering, yearning to know, when Moses laid that hand, what was going on in his heart? Was that second hand the result of his ecstasy in knowing the Israelites would finally have their new shepherd? Was Moses so pure, so righteous, so selfless, that it would never cross his mind to be sad that he was going to have no part in this next chapter? Or was Moses heartbroken? Was he sad? Was he bitter? Was he angry? Angry at God. First, for punishing him so severely for a transgression he didn't realize he made, and then for denying him the honor and pride of appointing his children to lead in his place. Did it take all his strength to lift his hand upon this man, and more strength than he knew he had to lift the other one? And why? Because he suspected that the Israelites suspected that in his heart, Moses might not have been as accepting of Joshua as he led on to. And Moses knew that if the Israelites suspected that, they would never accept Joshua. So which is it? Was Moses great because he was incapable of thinking about himself? Or was he great because, despite being enmeshed in his own pain, did he do what was required of him? In other words, is a good person one whose thoughts match the righteousness of her deeds, or one who doesn't let less than righteous thoughts get in the way of good deeds? Of course, we will never know what was in Moses' heart, and perhaps it doesn't matter. Judaism, as a rule, prioritizes our acts over our thoughts. The righteous are known for their righteous conduct, and Moses is no different. What makes a good person? One who does good acts, even when he doesn't want to. And one final thought. I mentioned these two commentaries that paint very different pictures of Moses. The first opinion, in which Moses is motivated only by what is best for the people, that comes from the great medieval commentator Rashi. The second opinion, in which Moses' apparent concern is really a leading question meant to benefit his family, that opinion is also from the great medieval commentator Rashi. One Jew, two opinions. There is more than one way to understand the characters of our Torah, even within the same person. The beauty of our tradition is unearthing all 70 faces of our sacred text and growing from it and with it. Shabbat shalom.